Well, good evening, Cedar Falls, and welcome to our Committee of the Whole meeting for Monday, May 17th, 2021. I'll now call this meeting to order and bring us to our first item, which is downtown zoning ordinance discussion. This is scheduled for 60 minutes, and our Planning Community Services Manager, Karen Harwood, will start us off. So, Ms. Howard, the floor is yours.
Good evening. Our consultant team from Ferromed Community Recode is on Zoom joining us tonight. We're very pleased to be presenting to the Council the Planning and Zoning Commission's recommended draft of the Downtown Code. Before the consultants take away the majority of the presentation, I thought I would just acknowledge the work that's gone into the reviewing the draft by the Planning and Zoning Commission. So maybe, Jeff, if you could share your screen, we can go ahead and pull that PowerPoint presentation up. If you go ahead and go to the first slide, Jeff. So this is, I'm not going to go through all this, but this slide is basically just to emphasize that there was a lot of preparation that went into the draft that you see before you today. There was a long internal review process for the Downtown Code. And of course, we came to you back in December and talked about how the overview of this process would run through the public review process. And that public review period started in February with a rollout of the code to the public at a special Planning and Zoning Commission meeting on February 17th. So it's been available for the public to review that draft for some time, for several months. And during that public review time, the Planning and Zoning Commission also held 4 work sessions so that they could go over the draft in detail and ask any questions they have. It was an opportunity for us to then gather public feedback. During that period of time, staff was, we had people could email staff or call staff. It was on the web page, highlighted on the web page, so people could call in and ask questions about the code. We sent out notice widely across the whole area to all property owners. So the Planning and Zoning Commission, and we met with the Community Main Street in a work session to go over the code with them to make sure that they had a chance to ask any questions or offer any amendments. We also offered work sessions with developers in the community, development professionals, so that they had an opportunity to meet one-on-one with us to ask any questions or make any suggestions to the code. And then we held public hearings at the Planning and Zoning Commission and several public hearings. We presented that decision matrix, which is in your packet. The commission, anybody that presented an amendment to the code from the public or from the commission, we marked that down on that decision matrix so that the commission could go through each one of those amendments one by one and make sure that we heard what people had to say, and the commission could consider carefully any requested amendments. So with that, they made their recommendation to the council at their last meeting, and Jeff Farrell and Mary Madden and Elizabeth Garvin are here tonight on Zoom to present to the council and to the public that recommended draft from the Planning and Zoning Commission.
Okay, thank you very much. So Ms. Madden or Mr. Farrell, if you would like to go through the discussion tonight, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mayor. Hopefully my audio is working tonight. I'm going to briefly give you a whirlwind reminder history of this project, and then Jeff will dive in more detail exactly what's in the draft code. So I know we've been living in this weird pandemic time, but just as a reminder, this project actually kicked off a little more than 2 years ago in the spring of 2019, where we undertook the Imagine Downtown Visioning project. The council at that time adopted a set of priorities for the project that you see here in front of you. A reminder, the study area for downtown is highlighted here. So in addition to the core of downtown around the parkade, it includes the neighborhoods around Overman Park, as well as extending south down Main Street and over to the river and highway. Next. Similar to College Hill that we've all talked about just now, we went through a charrette process, but then we had the luxury of being in town with you all, walking the district, staying downtown, eating in the restaurants, meeting with people, going back out and taking a look. So we did a full charrette on the ground there in Cedar Falls with a series of meetings and public activities where we got feedback from the community about what they would like to see in downtown. We did put together a downtown vision plan, which was adopted by the City Council in November of 2019. And one of the big things that came out, the history behind doing this whole project was the idea that the code needed to be updated, but we wanted to make sure that that code could implement the community vision. These were high-level items that came out of that planning process that the draft code hopefully addresses all of these. We believe that it does, but we will take you through that. But the biggest thing is to think about downtown as a place and those nearby neighborhoods really supporting downtown, a synergy between the areas. Last but not least, we did all the visioning work, and so I want to highlight now is when you think about development regulations, zoning ordinances, those are really implementation tools for the vision plan. So what this code does is translate the vision that the community had for downtown into development regulations, what needs to be changed to produce the types of development that the community said they would like to see in this area of Cedar Falls. And Jeff's going to walk you through some details of that code.
This walkthrough, first of all, is aimed at normal people, not code people like us and Karen and staff. So it attempted to walk you through it. We call it 3 easy pieces. And in this, we'll ask you to imagine you're a property owner or you just want to know what the property across the street can do. There's 3 pieces to it. The first is the regulating plan. That's the, I'll call it a 21st century zoning map. So it's like a zoning map, but a little more specific. We're going to zoom into that so we can take an example. Let's just, by chance, zoom into this piece of the downtown. You notice there are some very different things in a zoning map on it. It's got some lines on it, some particular things, the color in the streets. First thing to notice, the required build-to lines. Those are the red dashed lines. That tells you where to place the facade of your building, sort of where to start the building. The second are the blue dashed lines. Those are parking setbacks. Anywhere behind that line you can park, and that can be surface lot, underground, structure as the market allows and the design demands. Simply put, the parking setback line is to make sure that no one has to do that. Walk by a parking lot, that's a real negative on a street. So you see those lines show you where to start the building, where you may place the parking, and most important, you see that, in this case, orange color in the public space, which would be for most of the downtown area. That sends you to the building form standards, which give you in 3 dimensions the form and function of the building. Now, on the regulating plan, there's a key, and that orange color here tells us that's the urban general category. So, opening up the building form standards, there's a page of intent on that, which has text and images giving you a rough idea of the kinds of buildings we're talking about. And then next page, there's a section that, because this is a little bit of a different kind of a code, talks about the kinds of basic configurations that are possible under this form standard. You can see they're actually quite varied. And then the rules themselves, organized in a series of very direct, simple diagrams in combination with text, placement, where to put the building, where setbacks are, where built-tos are, heights, story height, ground floor elevation height. Again, simple diagrams. The idea is to leave, whether it's an architect or an attorney, the least to talk about, just hear the rules, plain and simple. Elements, for most of the buildings, these are simple windows and doors parameters, so you don't have blank walls or glass boxes. But they also can get into things like balconies, front porches, stoops, and storefronts. And something most different about a form-based code, the use parameters are very broad. They're still there, but they're very broad, less controlling. And one specific example of something, the form-based code has a provision for private open space. Some kind, it could be on a rooftop or behind the building. And here you see that on a specific lot, one of the typical 66-foot wide lots, where that percentage for a general urban, how that would work out to be literally, as you see that square green box, that would be the private open area that would be required for this lot. And here's a visual kind of explanation of that. I think you've probably all recognized this place. Here's a building on Clay Street, an example of where the form-based code would be laying down that required building line. So if and when the owners of this property ever decided to redevelop, the first thing they'd notice is that required build-to line on their property, which would say where new buildings need to be aligned. This makes sure that all the buildings on the block and through the city function together. Here's an example of where someone might be building townhouses in that space, aligned to the required building line. And also you see now down the street on another lot, buildings, adjacent buildings would also be aligned similarly. You also see a little bit the kind of variation possible under the code. And then adding the final element, which is the streetscape, which makes the full place. Now the third part of this, up to this point, you know in abstract form where the building sits, how tall it must be, minimum, maximum height, and you know that you won't have parking exposed to the street. The third of the easy pieces is the architectural standards. We sometimes refer to this as the dress code. These are organized, they have a purpose and intent, applicability, and their basic content is a materials list and configurations. And these govern things, well, briefly put, these are not intended to be style straitjackets. It's about the building functioning. And you might recognize this is not a prescription for State Street or Main Street, but just an example. The architectural standards don't prescribe a style, but they prescribe the buildings, make sure that they fit together. It's not about saying where this building should look like this building or that. That would be getting into the style. It's about the buildings having the right basic materials and fitting in, and the form-based code makes sure that the buildings have appropriate windows and doors. They engage with the street in a way that makes them live well. Again, the three easy pieces: regulating plan, the building envelope standards, the architectural standards as the third. I'm going to do attempt a really quick walkthrough of all the pieces, introduction and definitions. Because definitions are important because this being a form-based code, certain words are used in a very precise way. That's not the convention for planning and zoning. Regulating plan, the piece I just talked about, the building form standards, which have multiple components, and they cover several different frontages. You see the types: urban general, storefront frontages, neighborhood medium frontages. In this case, think of the neighborhoods just south of downtown, neighborhood small, a bit more fitting to the Overland Park neighborhood next to downtown, and then additionally the possibility for cottage courts. Now, remembering the downtown neighborhoods, we have two things going on. If you look at the bright colors, the oranges and the reds, those are what might be conventionally thought of as kind of a downtown atmosphere, buildings right up to the street. The lighter, the cooler colors, the blues, are those close-in neighborhoods, and they're an important part of the downtown study area as well. Other parts of the code, the architectural standards, that dress code, the public realm, oh, sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself, and the components of the architectural standards, windows and doors, roofs, eaves, and parapets, special standards for shop fronts, street walls and fences, front porches, stoops, and canopies, and lighting and mechanical, as well as signage, are covered in the new form-based code. The public realm standards cover the street space between the curb and the front of the building, helping ensure that that's a positive pedestrian place, street trees, dooryards. Parking and loading, which is just what it sounds. I don't have any good image to that. It's just parking behind the building. Then the building functions, something that's a little more unusual in a form-based code. Those have been organized into simple categories. There's also some, in some places, differentiation between what's allowed on the ground floor versus the upper floors. And something special I'd like to point out that's very important. The kind of thing the code includes, something we call neighborhood manners. This is an extra layer of care where new and more intensive development might be backing up or adjacent to an existing neighborhood of single-family houses. One example of this might be on properties that front First Street but back up to parts of the Overland Park neighborhood. We've got special prescriptions here to make sure that that's a complementary relationship, not one of conflict. And then some images of the kind of things the code does not allow. That garage doors facing the street, no. Ugly boxes and the kind of back of house things, we keep them at the back of the house, not up on the street. Something we do allow, and actually something you've already got, this is, you might recognize this picture, part of your downtown already. And things we don't allow, buildings that have no connection with the street. No doors, no engagement, whatever the architectural quality of these buildings, they're completely shut off from the street and kind of kill the activity of the street, versus buildings like this that front on the street and help make it a pleasant place. The code also doesn't allow glass block buildings, glass curtain wall buildings. They're really not too good for the street space either. And you're in trouble if you're on the wrong, if you get the reflection of them on an August afternoon. As opposed to doors and windows and storefronts like this, very human scale, great places. And in this case, as I'm sure you recognize, something that Cedar Falls has and we're including in the code. Not something like this. The brick material is included, but again, example of a building that doesn't engage with the street and thereby kills it, which makes a pretty radical comparison to what you've got here, the front of the theater building, simple storefronts, frequent windows and doors, Not this. Parking is behind, and the building facade should be a little bit more calm. And our rules we learned from the positive things that you've already got in Cedar Falls. Things that are more linked to the scale of the neighborhood, and apologies back on the things we don't allow again. You can't do things like this under the new code. You can't do things like this. Main Street, small apartment building, a good model for future building as well in Cedar Falls. That's really not such a bad building, but it's not quite as good. The code doesn't quite allow that. It would allow a variation on it, but too long, too unbroken. And here's a much better model. Also, you might recognize this as being in your own town. Here's a brand new version of a set of row houses. Not in Cedar Falls, but row houses are very much in the code, and we expect to see some more of those built. Here's a set of row houses that is on Main Street just south of downtown. And a building type that the code sets the table for, cottage courts, something you don't have. Well, you have one that's very close. This photograph is not Cedar Falls. I think this is Portland, Oregon. But a set of cottage courts, it's a new building type, almost. And I would point out, you've got actually a really interesting model in Cedar Falls. This is a set, there are actually 3 houses. It's not quite, it's got a pretty small courtyard, but there are 3 very small cottages arranged. There's a 3rd one in the back with a very common, very small kind of courtyard in the front. This is something we're kind of fascinated by, but it's an example of a cottage court, and there could be built more of these in the town. Other types, duplexes, row homes. Here's a couple of existing ones you have that could provide a great model for new construction. And I'm getting a little ahead of myself. A duplex. And finally, showing the example of what we're talking about, the code enables for transformation of the downtown. This is with your back right to Main Street, looking west. And the code sets up, you've already done streetscape improvements, but the code sets up situations, makes it easier to build new buildings to complement the downtown and fill it out as a full-fledged, vital people place.
Elizabeth.
I'm jumping in. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So we need to make some changes to the current zoning code in order to make sure that we're fully citing the form-based regulations, the downtown character district, in the rest of the code, because it will function with the rest of the Cedar Falls zoning ordinance. So we've made a few recommended changes within the procedures and the use sections that will help link the downtown character districts to the rest of the code. So the first update is formalizing the site plan review process. And I believe the city does some site plan review now. We wanted to make sure that we clarified how this process works. As Jeff was explaining, the form-based regulations provide a great deal of certainty about how development takes place on the lot. And in most communities, once the form-based regulations have been adopted, approval takes place administratively, because the list of things that you would talk about and negotiate and think through in a more conventional zoning code and Clidian zoning regulations, you worked through those and resolved how those things should happen in this code by the time it gets adopted. So when the property is zoned for the character district, an applicant comes to the city with a site plan for review and approval. And the upside of this is it's a far more streamlined process. So the site plan in the draft regulations, the process is applicable to all applications in the downtown character district. Site plan review is handled by the zoning administrator. The zoning administrator can be helped by a zoning review committee and a technical advisory committee. If the administrator wants to get a separate set of eyes on an application, then the code allows for these two committees to function in that capacity. So the review criteria for an application is that the site plan is consistent with the applicable adopted plans and policies, that it's consistent with prior approvals or any conditions that are placed on the site, and that it conforms to the zoning code. It conforms to the entire Cedar Falls Code of Ordinances, but really when we're talking site plan, we're focused on does it conform with the standards that Jeff has just described. So the various regulations about where the building sits on the lot, where the parking goes, and how the uses are used, that's all addressed through the site plan review process. We do know on some lots that there may be a reason to adjust the standards somewhat. We realize there are going to be people that are going to come through that are going to have a slight problem. And so we've accounted for those changes, and I'll talk about that in a second. Jeff, if you'll do the next slide, please. Thank you. So because these regulations are applicable downtown, we know that Cedar Falls is built out for the most part downtown. And we want to make sure that property owners are not frozen in place by not being able to comply with the new regulations, or being stuck in a situation where the new regulation requires something physically to happen on the lot that can't happen with the amount of development that this property owner wants to do. So we've added in a process which we call proportionate compliance that talks about if you, as the property owner, are making a certain proportion of change on your property, here's how you comply with these new regulations. And the goal of this process is to bring properties into conformance as much as possible with the new regulations without asking for that, which isn't really possible given the development that's taking place on site. So I'll ask Jeff to go to the next slide, and we can look at this fun table. And I know everyone will want to spend some time with this table. It's a proportionate compliance table. And what this tells you down the first column on the left side, depending on the type of construction that you're doing, you will need to comply with, or you will not have to comply with, certain provisions of the new regulations. So you read down the left side and you figure out what sort of change you're making to the property. So are you changing the use? That is about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 8 spaces down on the left side, no building expansion, change of use. You need to comply with, come across the table, the use standards and potentially the sign standards if you're changing your signage. Fairly straightforward. But if you're expanding a building and your building is, over 2,000 square feet or under 2,000 square feet, then the regulations become a little more specific, and you figure out what percentage of change your expansion is, and then we can work through the table and figure out how the building changes need to comply with the new standards. So again, the goal there is to make redevelopment really a definitive possibility for a property owner, and to address how the regulations work in a built environment. Jeff, could you go to the next slide, please? Thank you. So back to where we were a minute ago, we realize that some lots may have some complexity to them based on what's going on the lot. And the code identifies a series of specific minor adjustments that are acceptable to adjust the structure to the lot to the structure, depends on how the application comes in. and that these minor adjustments may also be made administratively, which is why they're all set as measurable standards. These are objective adjustments. So it's designed in the code so the applicant can come in before construction if they realize that they're going to bump into a problem, or periodically, rarely, but periodically, someone will run into a site problem during construction. And if that site problem falls into minor adjustments, they can come in and have their approval adjusted so that the project can continue. So we've given you some examples here of the limits that are placed on these standards. So for example, if your property requires a street wall or a fence, those standards can be changed up to 10%. So nothing really big, everything is pretty minor adjustment. But this is, the goal with this is to continue that moving forward, to get development going, and to make the application process predictable and streamlined. In this section, the code also addresses two particular issues that have come up because of the architectural standards and because of the city's alley pattern. And so within this section, there are instructions for how to amend the materials lists to include equivalent or better building materials, and also instructions for how to address development on a property that is going to need non-alley curb cuts. So in case you're looking for those, they're in the minor adjustment section. Next slide, Jeff. So the other big category that we have linked the form-based code to the current regulation is through the uses. Jeff shared the downtown character district use table earlier. In some respects, it's very much like a standard use table you would see in traditional regulations. The uses moving forward are grouped by category. So you can see that we have a category of residential uses, commercial uses, civic and institutional uses, and industrial, wholesale, and storage uses. This is a little different than the current regulations, where uses are listed by district in a laundry list. It's a best practice for zoning regulations to consolidate this sort of information, to keep one list of uses and then identify the districts where those uses are permitted. It stops some of the redundancy that we see in regulations, and kind of when we see redundancy, we often see things change over time. So what should have been identical in year one somehow becomes different uses in year 5 or 10. So we're kind of bringing the code into this place of consolidating uses and moving them all into one location, and we can start with the form districts for that. Within each of these categories, the residential, commercial, civic, institutional, you'll find a description of the category, examples of the uses that can be approved in that category, examples of accessory uses, and in specific situations, uses that are excluded because it's possible to read an overlap. So let's take eating and drinking establishments. For example, somebody might say, well, I am doing, a large buffet, and I want to consider that commercial assembly instead of an eating and drinking establishment. So we've tried to clarify within the regulations that if you're included in one district, in one category, you're not in another, and sometimes we're very specific about that. The regulations have a process for interpreting new uses. Uses change all the time, and we want the city to be able to handle that efficiently. And so we have established criteria for interpreting uses into this new table. And then these categories are included in the character districts. And as Jeff pointed out earlier, there's a little bit of detail added here about whether the use is permitted on the ground story or the upper story, which speaks to the functionality of how some of the form districts, form regulations work. So sometimes it's acceptable to have a use on the ground floor and on the upper floors, and sometimes we want that use to function on an upper floor because there's something else going on the ground floor. So if you think of old and new again, I have my shop front, I have my store on the ground floor, I live above it. And so we want to say, hey, let's not turn that ground floor space into residential, but we'd really love to have residential on the second story or higher. Following this table in the draft, you will find that there are some specific standards for a number of these uses. If you read the far right column here that says additional regulations, you can see a cross-reference out to the specific standards that are applicable to the use. So as you're reading through the draft, you can take a look and see how that works. The different standards applicable by use, not necessarily by district. I think, Jeff, that was it for me. You got anything else there? Oh, I gave you an example. How nice. So this is what it reads like in the draft. So if we're looking at commercial uses, we see that the general description, commercial uses can include retail, consumer service, or office use. We've broken it down into some subcategories. So we have amusement and recreation as a sub-use category. Within amusement and recreation, which is a large and fun category, we also have some further subcategories, indoor, outdoor, and adult business. We needed to carry forward the current adult business regulations, unchanged. And then, so this gives you an idea. This works with the table we just saw. So this helps everybody understand how the city recognizes what uses fall into the categories in the table we were just looking at. Okay, I think I'm going to stop here and turn it back to Mary to talk about the amendment matrix, correct?
Yes. Thank you, Elizabeth. As Karen mentioned, we spent the winter and spring working through the draft downtown character district ordinance. We released a public draft. We posted on the web. We did a series of work sessions with the Planning and Zoning Commission. Staff did the meetings with different stakeholder groups and Community Main Street. We received quite a few comments, feedback. We had discussion in the work sessions with Planning and Zoning. And from that, during that period, as Karen mentioned, we compiled a list of recommended changes. The P&Z Commission worked through those and then ended up giving staff further direction and consultants further direction, which changes they wanted to make, how they wanted to make those, and which ones they decided to leave the draft as is. So you will see this in your packet. It's not part of the code, it's part of the background material. Next slide, Jeff. High level, basically the changes that were made from the public review draft to the P&Z recommended draft, a group of them we call technical. They generally, I would describe them as they provide more clarity or more specific direction as the review took place, that not any change in the intent of what was proposed, to just make things more consistent. Things that had to do with, we know in Cedar Falls you have some small lots, and so how the standards might need to be adjusted for the small lots related to the private open area. Made adjustments to required building lines on 2nd Street because we realized there was some inconsistency there. We worked through, as we were working on the uses, as Elizabeth just highlighted, we were going back and forth between the character district and the overall ordinance. And so we went back to clean up some of the terminology because as that was an iterative process, we found some internal inconsistencies. There were some, I will blame the computer, some ghosts in the machine. We had some numbering outline problems that were a little haywire. Specifically, the Historic Commission identified more buildings that they felt should be identified as civic buildings on the regulating plan. And there was a decision to clarify commercial assembly uses into 2 categories based on their size to make it clear what would be permitted, for example, in the downtown type setting versus in a more suburban setting. So those were all made to the public review draft. As I said, we call those technical. They were really just sort of clean up. The next group, Jeff, had more to do with content. So these were comments that came either from the P&Z Commission members or from members of the public. There was There was some question about the fact that in some of the neighborhood areas there are existing businesses today, and the desire to make explicitly clear that those businesses are permitted to continue, that they would be considered conforming, but the idea that no new businesses would be permitted in the neighborhood areas, but the desire is to keep them more concentrated in the core of the downtown area. There was quite a bit of discussion about the use of vinyl siding for private single-family homes, and so we made some adjustments to that to make it clear that individuals could use vinyl siding on their homes, but for other buildings, if there were already siding, it could be used, but that for new construction, vinyl siding should not be used. There was some local architects requested specifically the way we had worded some materials list. Foam products were not permitted, and so we went back to clarify a quality level of foam products that could be used for architectural detailing, which is in particular important for restoring historic buildings. We also provided some, or had discussion about some additional standards for the creation of accessory dwelling units to ensure that there was ways for the city to enforce owner occupancy over time. And generally that will be addressed procedurally rather than being addressed in the code text itself. Next. I think Karen.
Yeah, so finally, just a little bit about next steps. Just to note that the Planning and Zoning Commission's recommended draft is on the project webpage, ourcedarfalls.com, so people can still check that out and provide feedback to the council. They can submit questions and comments to the planning@cedarfalls.com. We monitor that inbox so we can answer questions directly to people that have queries. And then we'll develop a decision matrix for any request for amendments that come from the council, similar to what we did for the commission. It just helps to kind of organize everybody's thoughts, and I think it worked pretty well at the commission to get direction. And next slide. And we kind of laid out a basic schedule here. We know that it's tentative and it's up to the council on how this goes, but we thought we would give sort of a timeline. Of course, June 7th, we would plan a work session with you all to run through any questions that you have, any suggestions for changes. It's just a general, so you understand the code, to dig into it a little deeper. And then we would take any requests for amendments or changes. We bring those back to you in a decision matrix on June 21st in a work session. And then if no other changes then, and you're satisfied with what the changes are, we would bring back then a draft with the changes made that you had suggested. And that would be then potentially on July 19th. And then on that date, if you're satisfied with that draft, we would set a public hearing. And then the public hearing would be in August with third reading, finally in adoption at the beginning of September. So, and we would be happy to, of course, answer any questions that you have.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Howard, and to Farrell Madden for your presentation tonight. I'll open it up to council. We've got a time budget of about 20 minutes, but certainly can go over that if necessary to have questions answered. So, Councilmember Harding, you want to start us off?
I'm going to start with the the use table. I actually really like the table. It's nice to see the visual. Could someone elaborate on if someone was like, especially with Zoom and working from home and how everything's changed, could someone elaborate on how someone who is self-employed or has a home occupation, is that allowed under this? So I'll use the example. It says financial services are not allowed in neighborhoods, medium or small. But what if someone was a self-employed financial helper and had clients come over? Are they not allowed to do that because of the way it's laid out?
you want to take that, or do you want me to take it?
I can start, and I don't have the page I could bring up, but the very beginning in the downtown character district, it actually highlights home occupations, that those would be permitted following the same system that you use today. So we did call that out expressly, that would continue to be an option.
Okay, other questions, comments? Yes, Councilmember Cruz.
I guess great presentation. I appreciate that. Thank you. A lot of information. Concern I have here is the allocated parking. We have tremendous feedback from the public, how our downtown is congested and so on. And we have the proposed idea of a half a spot per unit. And I find that extremely problematic to further densify the living and not accommodate parking downtown. I see shortages of parking going to spill over into the residential areas, and I've noticed there's been resistance to implement any resident-only parking areas, which would solve that problem, but they continue to be resisted. So I think something needs to be changed there in regard to that aspect of it. It'll just make complaints in the city worse. But all in all, I guess I look at it as the cosmetics of improving the commercial building downtown and that sort of thing. But the other element is the required building line. Now, I understand that you want to have uniformity along the street, but if somebody has a unique situation, a building design, if the zoning administrator or the zoning review committee doesn't like it, are they able to appeal to council, or does council review these building plans after the zoning review committee looks at it?
I can start that, and then Jeff and Elizabeth and Karen may want to chime in. One, I think we should clarify the required building line. It doesn't mean absolutely everything is straight. There is room for articulation, first of all, and secondly, there is a percentage build to, so it's not absolute, depending on the frontage area that the property is designated in. We have had some discussion about, currently, and the Planning and Zoning Commission had discussion about that idea of design or things that didn't exactly meet the code. We ended up leaving it as the administrative review process. Obviously, this does not remove the ability for someone to request a variance, but that goes to a different, not to the city council. But there was quite a bit of conversation about this, but I believe the P&Z felt like there was incredible flexibility within the parameters of the standards as drafted. I don't know if Jeff, Elizabeth, or Karen want to add to that.
Mayor, I think you covered it pretty well. And the bottom line is the standards for our downtown area are they're enabling what is basically very normal. And I do think there is a lot of flexibility in them. And as Mary pointed out, look at both the combinations of there's a minimum percentage of building that's supposed to be on the RBL. It's not 100%, and it varies with the intensity of the location. And also that RBL has a depth within it, which is their inviting articulation.
One thing that I would like to point out is that all of the zoning districts that are included in the downtown study area are all of our older zones. And none of those have to go through the Planning and Zoning Commission or the City Council, except for the ones that are in the Central Business District overlay. So any proposal outside the overlay within the R3, R4, C2, C1 areas that are included in the study area. And that's one of the reasons that we were doing the code update, is that there were a lot of these older zoning districts that didn't have a lot of standards to them. And so by creating really clear and objective standards, the idea is that we could allow development to occur in a way that is consistent with our vision, but still not have to go through then a negotiated process through P&Z and council. So it streamlines the process for the developer, but provides a little bit more certainty for the community that what the result will be is something that's consistent with the vision.
Thank you, Ms. Howard. Now to follow up with that, what's been our feedback so far from the developer community in the area as they've seen the drafts?
In general, I think there was a lot of interest in streamlining the development process. A lot of and Mary and Jeff, Elizabeth, of course, interviewed a lot of them during the visioning process, and they can tell you specifically a little bit more about that. But in general, they said, we just want to know what we can build. We want to know what the standards are so that we can move forward a little more quickly, because of course time is money. And so what they were concerned about is they come forward with a plan, the standards are kind of vague, and then the plan changes, and so they have to go through a lot of expense to retool their plans and have to go through the process again. So I think there was interest in getting a streamlined process, even though it meant that there's more regulations on the books.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes, Councilor Cruz?
I guess I want to continue following up on my earlier question. The appeal process would go to the Board of Adjustments, but does the builder or whoever, resident person, want to, or can they appeal to council? Because I think that's important. That elected officials are the ultimate people who decide what gets developed and built, not staff. I mean, truthfully, the zoning review committee or the zoning administrator can develop a cozy relationship with developers, and then things that could be gray areas suddenly become black and white, and that's not, I don't think what we would want as a community. Is that an option, to appeal to the council?
I'm going to let Elizabeth maybe answer that question.
So thank you. The way the code is drafted, there is not an appeal from an administrative determination. I believe under Iowa law that goes to the Board of Zoning Adjustment. Some of that ties back to the conversation that Karen, Mary, and Jeff were describing that took place with P&Z. It is possible to draft a process where somebody could come through with a whole series of adjustments, but that takes away from the effort and the expectations that the community has put into drafting the code that is this specific and predictable. So it's not in front of you at this point with this draft to have an appeal to the City Council. That would be something you would be looking for feedback on from the council. Jeff, I'm done if you wanted to jump in on that.
Just worth remembering that the code, this is all written in to implement the citizens' vision plan. So if someone wants to do something different than the plan, that's another thing. But the basic logic behind the code descriptions and the reason it's administrative is it's implementing that citizens' vision.
Just, do I understand right that with the code as it's being proposed is meant to specify set standards that developers should be able to follow? So if someone was appealing to council, it'd be because they weren't following that standard that was already in place, correct? So I would think that'd be less likely to happen than more. Like you're not going to have a plan approved by staff and then someone come in to say, no, we don't want that to be in the area, or to appeal to council, we don't want this building in our area, because it's already been listed as okayed in the code, correct? So it's meant to take most of that process out of the council by just having clear direction. This is how I understand it. Is that accurate?
Right, and if we had, I think the goal here is to get more clear and objective standards into our zoning ordinance. Right now, in every part of the city, you have to follow the zoning, because that's the law. So if you want to vary from what the zoning rules are, there really isn't generally an appeal process to council. You have to request a variance from the Board of Adjustment to vary from the zoning rules. Now, you can build in some sort of a review process, which was what we had before, but I think one of the goals was to try to get away from, by substituting more clear and objective standards for that negotiated review process. So there was quite a bit of discussion at the Planning and Zoning Commission. It is highlighted sort of the pros and cons in that decision matrix, and of course, we're happy to talk about it again with the council on that particular point.
Mr. Mayor.
Before that, does any other council member have a
Mr.
comment?
Mayor?
Yes, Councilmember Cyrus, then we'll come back to you.
I'm for less government overreach, as everybody knows. I think we're forgetting who actually made our downtown a great area, and that's the stakeholders who own the properties down there. It takes away from their decisions, and their decisions are what has made that a great area. I don't like taking planning and zoning out of the mix. I think that board does a lot of good things and looks at things from different perspectives. And some things like hiding your utilities are just really not a reality. It's nice to beautify, but some things just aren't feasible. It's just these stakeholders, I'd like to see a lot more input from the people that actually own the properties down there, because I think they have the real knack for making a great area. So I'm for less restrictive and a little more input from the downtown area. I'd like to get down there and talk with them a little bit more. So that's where I'm at.
Okay, Councilor DeBarra.
I'd like more information about, you mentioned that there was a lot of public input, but yet when they use the names like Imagine Downtown or Imagine the Hill, it makes people think that it's like a 3 to 4 blocks on the hill or 3 or 4 blocks downtown, and they don't realize that this is affecting a lot of homes, a large area. So my question is I'd like to know more about the feedback that you got from homeowners that will be affected eventually throughout the entire city.
Right.
And I have a second question too, I might as well hit too, is why are they banning vinyl siding?
So actually, there were changes made to the draft related to that particular thing, so we're not banning vinyl siding. So the commission sort of weighed the pros and cons to the prohibition and decided to allow it in circumstances. I think there's some, in the decision matrix, it kind of lays out the pros and cons there. Of course, it is a popular building material, but it also has some fairly drastic environmental consequences over time, that particular material, because it's not particularly recyclable. It damages quite easily. But it was weighed against the desire for people to use vinyl siding on their existing houses, and so the commission found sort of a middle ground there between. So you can review that, and of course we can discuss it again at your work session if you'd like.
And
With regard to the neighborhood areas, actually, I got more phone calls from neighborhood residents about the new code. They got the letters, of course, in the mail. They got a postcard, and then it was followed up by a letter talking about rezoning their properties. And most of people just wanted to be reassured that, their housing, could continue. And I think they viewed it positively in the fact that they felt like right now with the current zoning, a lot of that neighborhood area is fairly vulnerable to other types of development that would not be consistent. And quite a few people's homes were actually non-conforming now with the current zoning because they're in commercial zones, and yet for all us that are viewing those and the people that live there, they view them as residential. And so it's trying to get the mismatch between what our current zoning is and what most people desire it to be as part of a neighborhood area.
Well, was that zoning because it was changed? Obviously, it wouldn't have been commercial when they built.
Right. Of course, these neighborhoods are very old, and so over time, as zoning changed, there's a lot of C1 and C2 areas that are just outside of the core downtown. And I think a lot of people don't recognize that they're zoned commercial now. And so actually their single-family home is considered a non-conforming use. So I think a lot of people, felt comforted, I guess, about the fact that the new code is going to recognize that these are neighborhood areas to preserve.
Okay. Councilmember Cruz, you had a question earlier?
You kind of hit on it a little bit there, legal nonconforming. I guess I was kind of zeroing in on irregular shaped lots. But also, when you got the evolution of the city over decades and, well, a century and a half or so, that like around Overman Park, Franklin Street, there's going to be an evolution of some of those older homes into businesses and shops and cafes and antique stores and what have you. And this seems to curtail that ability to do so. And I think the quaintness of Cedar Falls is that some of these historic looking buildings are, unusual looking buildings, according to current standards of building, would be very quaint as they are developed into other uses than residential. We run into this whenever we talk about the rental business, how they want to preserve the single-family homes. But the truth is some of these homes are no longer efficient for single-family homes, and they're going to be a higher and better use to be commercial or rental. I think we lose sight on the fact that 35 to 40% of the population rents, and we need something besides high-rise rental apartment buildings, because people want their backyard just like anybody else does, and a fire pit in the backyard. So I don't want to see any of this curtailing the ability to have these as rentals. Everybody can become a landlord. An accidental landlord is the term, when they didn't realize that their house isn't selling and they need to convert it into a rental for a short time period. But the thing I'm really concerned about, and we haven't addressed it when I said a little bit ago, we're taking a leap from a fully parked apartment building, and we've said this, a number of us on council have said this, and the public says this: you can build whatever you want as long as it's fully parked. And now you cut that in half, and you're implying that there's going to be shared parking. Well, that means that somebody who paid for and built a parking lot down there is going to have to share it with the general public or a residential person living downtown. And we run into the element of how does that get maintained over the next 30 years, and when it needs to be replaced, who's going to pay for it? The person that put it in. The Viking Pump parking area, we're able to use that for the general public, but how's that agreement set up to cover the maintenance of that in 30, 40 years when it needs to be replaced? So I have a big concern where we are slashing the parking in half for the residential component of a multi-use building. But still, in the residential area, from what I could see real quickly, you require one off-street spot per bedroom, and you're not allowing the residential renter to use the street. But in the downtown, you're relying on the street to park the residential area. And that's a bit of a conflict that needs to be addressed.
So we certainly can run through the details of the parking section. I know that's a hot topic, and so maybe that's a topic for your work session to kind of walk through the details of both the neighborhood areas and the downtown areas in more detail to understand kind of the nuances of how it's set up to work. So those are good questions.
Along with the resident-only parking. That's a very popular tool in many communities that I've been in to protect the residential area from the overflow of commercial parking areas of town or destinations.
Thank you.
Just back to your earlier question about the the variety of, if you recall back to when we did the vision plan, the neighborhood areas aren't set up to be just single-family only. The code actually is set up according to what we talked about in the vision plan, which was to provide a variety of housing types that weren't necessarily downtown larger buildings and not necessarily single-family housing, but all that missing middle housing, the different housing types that Jeff and Mary talked about, the duplexes, the townhomes, single-family, this idea of the cottage court, which captured a lot of people's interest during the visioning process. So we have incorporated that and allowed that in a lot of those neighborhood areas. So there are a variety of housing types to, like you said, house future generations of people that would like to live close to downtown.
Well, that actually brings up another point, if I may, Mr. Mayor.
Sure, and then we're looking at our time budget, we want to wrap
Okay,
up here, but
you talk about the mid-market, or what was the term you used for the?
Oh, missing middle housing is a term that was coined when we're talking about how neighborhoods used to be built with a variety of
Okay.
housing types.
Middle housing, duplexes, up and down duplexes, that sort of thing. So I'm getting the impression that the staff wants to see 3-bedroom as opposed to 4-bedroom places. So a duplex would be built with 3 bedrooms on each side. Is that what the direction you're steering the developer, or what?
So a little bit about the types of housing types that could be done, but also then how much could actually, what the intensity of that use of that particular piece of property. So yes, there is a control and be very specific on the number of bedrooms per unit in a multifamily and in duplexes. So that question is not, there's not a lot of speculation about it in the market.
Well, you're saying like the carrying capacity of the,
Carrying capacity of the property, thinking about moving forward, how do we address that in a more with some more clarity?
the specifics I was thinking of, you may endorse a 3-bedroom duplex, 3-bedroom on each side of a duplex, and give that your blessing with a 6-car parking lot. But what's to say you have a duplex with 4 persons on one side and 2 in the other half? Really isn't half, but the other part of the duplex. Still got the same parking lot. 6 people live there, but 4 on one side and 2 in the other. That seems to be not allowed. And I can even go 2 steps further ultimately. How about 5 bedrooms in one part of the duplex and a studio? You got the same 6-car parking spot. Or even, yet again, you could have all 6 bedrooms in one unit. It's not really a duplex anymore, it's just a 6-bedroom house with 6 parking spots. So it seems, I don't know if the right word is discriminatory towards something over a 3-bedroom unit. When the parking is there, you're off-street, it's not interfering with the neighbors. That's a concern, a big concern. So why are we choosing 3 bedrooms in each side being the standard?
And that's something that we would want to cover in the work session as
Sure.
like the detailed questions.
Right, and I know we're
Councilor Dura?
short on time, and it's called Imagine the Possibilities rather than Imagine the Problems. And right now, I've heard some really good, exciting ideas. I know the problems, the potential problems, but we're way ahead of that right now. So I would encourage all of us to identify what our concerns are for our upcoming meetings. I think we're going to have some work sessions. But I'd also encourage us to try to engage. I'm still interested in, I get all excited about all this stuff, and I don't think about the parking issues as much, but do we have developers that are ready to go? Are they, how excited are developers about some of this potential? And if we don't know, I would hope perhaps we could get some input from that group, people that are going to maybe be investing in this area. So as we go along, we can see that there are possibilities. It's not just a pipe dream, but there's people out there that are wanting to invest in this kind of thing. Is consistent with our theme of walkability and ready access and infill development, affordable housing. I mean, there's all kinds of potential if we can get all of these great ideas to come together. But without the developers kind of being equally excited, I have some concerns. So I hope we can get a little bit, either more of them at the table with us, or at least some feedback as to people seeing the possibilities besides people like myself. So just a hope for our next meeting.
Thank you, Councilmember Dara. With that, I will say toward the end here at this part of the discussion, to my great thanks, the council's great thanks to the whole team for the work that's been done on this so far, particularly to Farrell Madden and the work that Karen Howard, you've done personally on the project, and with the Planning and Zoning Commission especially, because P&Z's done a lot of the heavy lifting on this so far. And I look forward to further discussion through council to hash through some of the issues that have come up. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Thanks.
That'll move us over to our recreation update.
Thank you.
With Mr. Lillibridge, with Recreation and Community Programs Manager. So Mr. Lillibridge, the floor is yours. Not yet. Not yet, no. Okay.
Well, thank you, Mayor. I appreciate it. Again, my name is J.J. Lillibridge, Recreation and Community Programs Manager. And it's an honor to be in front of all you guys speaking tonight. And so I appreciate being able to provide you guys with an update. I started back in October, so it's been a little bit of a roller coaster ride for myself, especially in the midst of a pandemic. But we're definitely plugging away and doing the best we can to make sure we can provide the community with the best programs and services possible. So just to give you guys a little bit of a snapshot, whether you're familiar or not familiar with our team, we have a good blend right now currently, bringing on a new administrative assistant or administrative supervisor, but we do have some long tenured team members in there that are sprinkled in amongst myself, our fitness coordinator, who's been there just a couple of years, but Chris Schoentag, busy right now, getting the falls all ready to go, has spent several years with the city, as well as Brock Goose, primarily oversees all athletic programs in addition to summer camp. Christine Anderson is our marketing and communications coordinator in addition to childcare and small youth programs at the rec center. And then also Carrie Voss is the one I mentioned, recreation administrative supervisor, had taken over for longtime employee Peggy Frost, and doing a lot of great things there with the administrative and learning that position. And then Megan Gerhardt, who is our fitness coordinator, does outstanding job of providing fitness and wellness related opportunities within the facility, but also oversees all of our personal trainers within the facility as well. So a really well-rounded team, lots of experience. And so it's really been great getting to know each and every one of them and all the different things that they have seen within the community of Cedar Falls and how the recreation division has transformed over the last several years. But again, also able to sprinkle in a couple of new faces that have bring some different backgrounds and experience, which has been great to start to incorporate into our daily and weekly and grand vision. And so we're really excited about all those things moving forward. Still myself learning a lot about the Recreation Center, the one where it currently stands, built in 1993, and then the 2005 expansion, which included that main fit gym, which is a big piece of our recreation programming opportunities, as well as our fitness classes. And there was just a lot of expansion that was done that made that possible, and also makes the building what it is today. I like to say the facility that we like to hang our hat on, and probably the one that's most well known, obviously, is the Falls Aquatic Center. Right now, we're spending a whole lot of time. Chris is doing an outstanding job of getting that facility up and running. Been around since 2006, and so while it still does very, very well from a financial standpoint as well as an attendance standpoint on an annual basis, it's definitely starting to show its age. And so we're doing some things, you know, with the guts of the facility and trying to make sure that we're implementing some processes that will allow that facility to thrive, not just now, but well into the future. Some of the amenities that are in there: zero depth pool for those small kiddos, the lazy river with the inner tubes that goes around the facility, 2 water slides, an Olympic-sized pool, which is 50 meters, and within that 50-meter swimming pool is also some different aquatic toys, a basketball hoop, some different things that you can do. And that also has varying depths, so you can get in there as a teenager and then all the way up to full-grown adults to have some fun in the full-size swimming pool. And then, of course, we got our diving board and diving well that also includes a 3-meter platform, a 1-meter diving board, and then the drop water slide in that particular area. So getting that all geared up, it's really exciting to see. I'm really excited about the coming weeks and then getting into the summer, of getting the falls back open and running and as close to normal as we can. Athletics is one of our main areas, obviously using a lot of our gym spaces as well as partnerships with the school district on their gym space and field spaces, but our Birdsville Park, and then of course at our recreation center. Just to kind of give you a little snapshot, since 2000, we've offered over 44,000 athletic programs to the Cedar Falls community. 44,000 participants with roughly about 1,200 different athletic related programs during that time frame. It's just really good to take some time to look at how many people we're serving and what the volume of different programs that we're putting out, and it's just it's really cool to see that. You know, right now we're hiring people that can manage the fields and coach the teams and order the uniforms and get the chalk on the lines, and there's just a lot of effort and people involved to make those happen. And so it's cool to see numbers like this and how many people can be reached on a regular basis year after year. The Recreation and Fitness Center, you know, I like to say 99% of the people that are coming in there are trying to make a difference in their lives, socially, physically, you know, doing some different things to help improve their overall wellness. And Megan does an outstanding job of being able to use our spaces to its fullest potential and being able to recruit and train and inspire and motivate our different instructors to be cutting edge and be different and look for new certifications that can provide our community with unique opportunities to maintain their health and wellness, but also provide that social aspect, which has been so important to our facility, not just in the wanting to come in and you know, work out and sweat a little bit, but just to see some friends and communicate with the instructor has been such a blessing for us. And I know that the community really, really appreciates that we've been able to continue to offer classes during the last several months. But we average about 35,000 participants per year, and that's a really solid number of group exercise class participants. Especially for a community this size, we really thrive on that membership and the amount of people that are coming in to participate in our programs. And so Megan does an outstanding job with those instructors. What have we done over the course of the last several months during this roller coaster ride of a pandemic? I can speak to just a couple of the months that I've been here. I came from a recreation center in Texas, and it wasn't much different down there. We were doing a lot of the same types of things, and I'm really just trying to take a good hard look at how we're going to operate and how we can be the most effective and efficient facility and department for our community during a difficult time. We closed the facility toward the end of March and through June, of 2020, that is. And then we reopened them back up in June. We're able to provide those annual membership holders an opportunity to receive a 3-month extension on their membership. And so that was very well received, and we appreciate those members sticking around with us even during that time and then after. And we've seen a lot of them renew their membership over the course of the last couple of weeks and months as those 3-month extensions started to fall off. So it's good to see that they're still coming back and that they really believe in what we do. Started slowly bringing back programs. Wasn't a lot of programs going on right when I got here, right before the first of the year. But as we started transitioning into January and February, starting to learn more about the programs that we offer, what are the things that we've done really, really well, and we took a really good hard look at how can our community needs us right now, especially right in the middle of a pandemic and in the middle of the winter. How can we provide these services and programs as safely as we possibly can? One of the best programs that we really hang our hat on is the indoor park program, which we were able to bring back, and we had great attendance. We spread everything out. We sanitized everything. We spent hours of time during the months of January, February, March, and April sanitizing and making sure that we were able to put those programs on. We started reallocating equipment. How can we be able to get as many people in the facility safely as we possibly can? We looked at our activity room, which is one of the first rooms that you see as you enter into the facility, which has historically been a place for youth to go, where there's air hockey and ping pong and pool and some different things for youth. We brought equipment down from the weight room and we spread them out, and then we took our existing equipment that remained in the weight room and spread all of that equipment out to make sure that they were all within the safety measures that was necessary, but we were able to get more people in the facility to work out, especially when the weather was prohibited for people to be outside. So you can see kind of some of the pictures on there showing some of the different things that we did. And we also just wanted to start reimagining some of the spaces that we weren't utilizing. The one with the hard floor, if you're not totally familiar with the facility, that's one of our racquetball courts. We turned it into what we called the challenge court. All of our trainers took 1 week from about middle of January to the end of April, and they created a weekly challenge where you could go into the challenge court, and the workout was right on there on the whiteboard. And it featured all the different equipment that was in there, different rowing machines, kickboxing, dumbbells, and everything in there was sanitized on a regular basis by our front desk staff, which did an outstanding job of making sure that all the different spaces that we did repurpose and made available were sanitized and cleaned and organized on a weekly basis for our members. So where are we going, and who are we? That's a question that I keep, asking myself. What direction is Cedar Falls Recreation going? And so these are kind of some of the pillars that we're trying to focus on. What is our grand vision? What's our mission? What's our purpose? How do we fit in within the multiple facets of entertainment and leisure and recreation within this community and neighboring communities? Those are things that we need to factor in. What are our expectations for ourselves as a team? What are our expectations as we begin to put out new programs and new services, as well as reestablish those ones that we know our community desires on a yearly basis? And then just things like, our communication and our evaluation and innovation methods. What are we doing to stay cutting edge? How are we going to continue to be able to provide programs and services that are going to be top notch and going to be an outstanding and unique experience for our entire community? So we look at the feasibility study that was done in 2019. And some of the different things that we've done. One that I've already mentioned is the underutilized racquetball. One is, the pendulum swings, racquetball continues to be on the downslope, but pickleball continues to be on the upslope. And so those are things that we continue to look at. But what do we do with those spaces that have been designated for racquetball court for the last 20 years? Well, we did a not permanent option with the challenge court just to try to really, number one, be able to provide a repurposed space for more exercise, but also to really get a good feel is this something that our community wants? Do they like this style of exercise? Do they like that intimate space that was available to them? And I'll tell you that our personal trainers and a lot of individuals in the evening, your after work crew, that was very heavily utilized, and the personal trainers love taking their clients in there because it's a more of an intimate space for them and their client to communicate. So there's definitely been some pros and some cons to it, but definitely more pros when it comes to repurposing our space. Doing some different things in terms of adding gym space, which is one of the pieces as a part of the feasibility study that was brought up. You know, we're not in the business right now of really expanding the facility until our facility is fully packed and we're utilizing our current spaces to its fullest potential. If you're familiar with the facility, on the second level, there's a walking track, and on that walking track, there's a crosswalk area where you can walk from one side to the other. That used to be filled with cardio equipment, old cardio equipment that was first generation, meaning it was there when the facility was built. We were able to reallocate that stuff. Public Works was able to take some, Public Safety was able to take some, and now we have some new pieces of equipment that are going up there, some kickboxing type of pieces of equipment, TRX, and some different things that can appeal to that younger generation, which we're trying to also do that with the university being so close by. And we've as you guys know, we implemented the monthly membership just a couple of short months ago, and student membership is one of our highest sold memberships since that time. So that's great to see that we're starting to appeal to that generation. Locker room project was something that was high on the list of making sure that got repurposed and renovated, and they did an excellent job, and that was finished in 2020 as well. Swimming pool, obviously that was a big bulk of the feasibility study that was done back in 2019, and been lots of discussions and lots of meetings with the school district on where we're going with that, and we continue to keep working out the kinks and the details to make sure that we're designing and putting together a pool that will be the best opportunity for the school, the community, and everybody else that's going to be involved. And so that's very high on our communication list as it relates to checking something off the feasibility study, but also being able to provide something for the community. And then expansion of the rec center. Space in Parks and Rec, space is always the number one thing. Where can we store all of our equipment? Where can we keep the t-shirts? Where can we, do our conference meetings and everything? But for us, it still keeps coming back to looking at what our community needs. A lot of times you hear, well, what is it the community wants? What is it the community wants? Well, when it comes to space, we want to make sure that we take that time to really understand what it is that the community needs over what the community wants. Sometimes what the community wants can be that bright, shiny thing that ultimately can be something that we got to maintain 20, 30 years down the road while we're not actually using the space that we currently have to be able to provide them with the best services and programs possible. So where are we going? Evaluation, like I said, one of the biggest things that we want to make sure that we focus on is our communication, evaluation, and innovation. What are we doing to move forward? Current trends in Parks and Rec. We're constantly looking at what are the current trends. Starting to get our team a little bit more active in NRPA, the National Recreation and Park Association. Serve on several committees there and just using the different networks within this national organization, one of the best organizations to be a part of, and communicating with other people within other positions that are similar to our own in other communities in the state of Iowa, in the Midwest, and across the country. Doing a market study. Again, what is all being offered from a recreation and entertainment standpoint in the community of Cedar Falls, and how do we fit in there? We don't want to oversaturate the market by trying to duplicate lots of different services, but what can we do and get really, really good at to make sure that the community of Cedar Falls sees us as an asset to their community and to their quality of life? Pricing and understanding our costs. The pandemic brought this into light more than anything. What are people willing to pay for? What are people willing not to pay for? And we need to make sure that we're doing a really good job of understanding what our costs are. And that's not just what the cost is for our programs, but also what are our costs for everything that goes into maintaining our facilities, paying our ball field staff, and doing all the different things. Just like I mentioned, the falls starting to show its age. What is it going to cost to be able to maintain that and make it a quality asset for years to come? And those are the things that we're going to continue to keep looking at to make sure that we're putting ourselves in the best position to provide the community with the best programs and services and facilities possible. Collaborative partnerships. As the community becomes more interested in unique and different experiences, we might have to reach out to other small and large businesses, either here locally or regionally or nationally, that are able to provide those unique and different experiences. Some of the different ones that are out there right now are all on the virtual side of things, and it's been really, really neat to see those transpire over time. We're looking to work with these different service providers and different program providers in the future to be able to do things that maybe we can't do because we're not experts in it, but there are people out there that are experts in these very unique things that our youth are very interested in, and we're looking forward to partnering with them in the future. And again, I mentioned this before, what is our role in the community? Parks and Recreation departments across the country are starting to understand they don't have to do everything. They just have to do some things really, really well and allow the other people that are thriving to do really, really well. That's ultimately what creates a wholesome community and provides the community with the best possible experiences they deserve. Looking at ourselves as, right when I got here, it seemed like everybody referred to the rec as our division. I'm trying to change that philosophy. We're more than just a facility. I want us to be looked at as, well, we're parks and trails. Even though we're separate divisions, how can we utilize and how can we showcase our parks and our trails and the connectivity that is within this community to use it for walkability, use it for programs, and how can people get from A to B and participate in the different programs and services that we provide by utilizing our great parks and our trails. And also within our facilities, how can we repurpose them? I already kind of touched on that and what we're currently doing, but also looking at our other facilities, her Center for the Arts, the community center, the library. How can we start working with other divisions and other departments to make sure that we're not duplicating services, but most importantly, providing quality and unique experiences for youth, their families, and the like to make sure that they're getting the best services possible. And how are we going to continue to maintain our parks, trails, and our facilities, and how can all of our divisions start working together to accomplish those things so we can continue to provide those awesome parks, or those programs and services. Most importantly, you can have all the greatest facilities and programs in Parks and Recreation, but you can't do it without the people. And you can't do it without the people putting it on, but you can't do it without the participants. And we really want to allow the participants to be able to tell their story. Right now, it's been really, really interesting to see and refreshing to see all the different lifeguards that I've been able to get to know and the different camp counselors that they participated in Cedar Falls swimming lessons, or they participated in the Cedar Falls camp, and now they're counselors and now they're lifeguards. And so it's so cyclical about how they cycle through our programs, and then some of them go off to UNI and they get a recreation and leisure services degree. Those are the kinds of things that we like to see, and how we can allow the community to tell their story and how Parks and Recreation has impacted their life. And the pandemic has, though it had some challenges, parks have never been fuller, and places of nature and outdoors have never been fuller than they ever have been over the course of the last year. And how can we allow them to demonstrate what our services and programs and parks have been able to do for them during this time? Because it's not going to go away. It's only going to continue to highlight those opportunities that we can continue to provide moving forward. And then, we are Parks and Recreation. I love this industry. We have lots of different things that we got going on right now. I'm really excited about the different nuances of innovation and cutting cutting-edge programs and services. And look forward to working with our team and getting to know them over the course of the next several months and years, and providing Cedar Falls with the best recreation division that they deserve. So with that, I'll pass it back to you, Mayor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lillibridge. And we should start up at the top of the hour, but I don't want to cut off, if there are council questions, to go a few minutes past that. So just so Jeremy in the camera room knows, we might go a little extra. But do we have any questions from council for tonight to Mr. Lillibridge? Yes, Councilor Dale.
Just had one.
For comments.
Great to have you here, by the way. Thanks for doing everything you're doing. With the success of the Place to Play Park, has your board or have you guys talked about the implementation of that kind of equipment in other parks, or developing another such park in our community?
Yeah, I wish I could speak more to the parks than I already do. Obviously, I focus a lot more on the recreation with some of our members that are on our commission. We're very much involved in the development and implementation of that, as well as the funding that went along with that. That type of opportunity and that type of experience is definitely a trend within the industry. Something just as simple as making it inclusive. That's a hot button, a hot word right now that's going around, is making sure that our parks and our trails are inclusive and have easy accessibility. So we're definitely looking at those things. We also want to make sure that it's not oversaturated, just like our programs, but could we use different parks and other facilities that could have that kind of effect, like the Place to Play Park. So I can't speak a lot to it. Obviously, that's on the park side of things, but definitely they go hand in hand, and we want to make sure that we're putting ourselves in the best position to offer those things that we know are really, really successful and popular here.
Thank you. And I was curious too, with all the help wanted signs around town, how are you doing with your summer hiring for?
Yeah, we are being as creative as we possibly can. We're trying out walk-in interviews, actually starting tomorrow. And so we're going to do it for 3 days this week and 3 days next week, and that's for our front desk at the Recreation Center, as well as for all of our youth camp counselors, youth sports, but most importantly, lifeguards. We need a whole lot of lifeguards to run and operate that aquatic center throughout the year. And so this is something that I've seen some other Parks and Rec departments across the country start doing, is walk-in interviews. That's kind of the flavor of the day with that generation of kids. They kind of do it when they want, and so we're doing some different things to try to appeal to that generation. And the employment status has definitely been a challenge for us right now as it relates to unemployment for those seasonal positions. So we're trying to figure out how we can, number one, get some candidates in the door, but then also take a good hard look at our operations for those particular programs and facilities, and how can we creatively make it happen with what we currently have, just making sure that we have our bases covered with the cards that we have.
Okay, thank you. So for the thousands of kids watching tonight, they should know jobs are open.
That's my pitch right there.
Okay. Any other final questions or comments? Okay, seeing none, then thank you very much. Your passion is evident, and we're very glad to have you with us. So with that will conclude our Committee of the Whole meeting tonight, and we will pick up again in about 5 minutes for our regular City Council meeting just after 7 o'clock.